Hi, Grandma here reading Tirzah. The last chapter was, they were anticipated being trapped, and the Pharaoh's army was on their way, but God obscured the army so they couldn't see, and then opened up the Red Sea for the slaves to escape. Chapter 6, by the way, is called Escape. Forced to ride in the car with old Hannah and little ones, Orrin sat squeezed tightly against the wooden rails. Carefully, he stretched his feet between two children sound asleep on the floor. Pale light from the cloud illuminated everything about him: marching people, eerie beds of seaweed, strange stone shapes, and once what seemed like the hulk of an old boat half covered with weeds. One of the cartwheels struck a large rock, bouncing him against the hard wood of the floor. From her corner, Hannah groaned, "Hey, if the Egyptians do not get us this donkey cart well!" Orrin watched her old head nod till she fell asleep again. How can this thing be? He thought. We are in the middle of the sea where the water should be, and it's like dry land. He yearned to walk, to look closer at the wonders that lay scattered all about him, but his father had sternly forbidden him to leave the cart. Around his neck, the precious pouch hung, its contents safe. He would write about this night once they were across the sea and out of danger. Passer's gift of ink and papyrus would not go unused. At the thought of Passer, heaviness crept upon Orrin until he felt his eyes closing. Ram walked behind his uncle Shobal's goats, a silent Abishar at his side. Dreams were like this, he thought. Maybe this was a dream. One minute he stood with the men, ready to fight, waiting for the sure death that drove toward them in iron chariots. The next he was running to the sea and finding it indeed gone. Gingerly he stepped over a strange quill-like mound that quivered slightly as he looked at it. Was he dreaming? He looked at Abishur as if for an answer. Abishur's face was full of anguish. "My father was wrong, Ram. I knew it, and I didn't warn you. I should have tried." Anger choked his voice. "He's stubborn as a donkey. No one can make him listen to reason once his mind is made up." Ram knew it was true. Hadn't he done the same? "Abishur, it isn't like you think. From the start, I doubted Moses, doubted Yahweh." Ram pressed a fist tightly to his forehead. "None of this seems real yet." Abishur shook his head. "There's nothing I can do. Shobal is my father. I'm his son, and I have to stay with him. What scares me, Ram, is the way he can persuade others to follow him." For a long while the two walked in silence, each wrapped in his own misery. Cut off from the rest of the family, Tirzah and her cousins plodded on. Tirzah could barely feel her legs, and her arms were heavy weights. Sari balked at a dark patch of weeds in her path, making Tirzah stumble over her own feet as she reached out to prod her. Jerking the rope around the donkey's neck, she pulled her to the right. For a while, the seabed had been smooth, but now reeds seemed to sprout in their way almost everywhere. Suddenly, the reason flashed like a light through her. They must be nearing the other shore. "The shore! The shore!" she cried. It was true. Helping hands reached out to grab Sari's rope, and then her father's strong arms were lifting her, carrying her. Sobbing, Nahalath fell into her mother's embrace, followed by a tired Macha. Tirzah closed her eyes, content to be carried like a baby. She must have slept. Surrounded by piles of baggage, she sat up, brushing the sleep from her eyes. Would she never learn to stay awake? What was all the noise? Cries and shouts of people, and the wailing of children brought her to her feet at once. "The Egyptians must be coming after us," she exclaimed. Wildly, Tirzah looked for her mother and the others. Had they gone without her? On the rocks behind her, people were standing in thick knots. On the sandy shore below them, others waved their hands shouting, while some ran back into the seafloor to hurry the last of the marchers. In the light of the cloud, Tirzah saw the whole scene, and her heart beat faster. The chariots of the Pharaoh were coming. Already, they were halfway across the seafloor. Someone screamed as Tirzah ran for the nearest rock, slipping and clawing her way to the top. "Oh, Yahweh, help us!" she cried in her heart. Standing on the rock, she could see the chariots of iron far out in the sea. Every Hebrew man, woman, child, and animal was on shore now, but it was too late to flee further. Where could they go to hide from such a great army? As if she were bound to the rock, Tirzah stood upon it, unable to take her eyes away from the awful sight before her. Over the clamor of people wailing and crying to Yahweh, she thought she could hear the shouts of the soldiers. Some of the heavy chariots were bogging down in the mud, getting stuck, causing others following to crash into each other. It was happening everywhere that Tirzah looked. Chariot after chariot turned over, their giant wheels spinning helplessly. From the front line to as far back as she could make out, the chariots were in a tangled mass of accidents. As she watched, the confusion seemed to grow worse. Some of the chariots, now righted, were turning back away from the shore. Tirzah clapped her hands for joy. The Egyptians were retreating. Then, to her horror, a path opened, and through it came other chariots driving swiftly, the horses almost flying. Stunned, Tirzah barely noticed the pale light of dawn beginning to streak the sky. All about her, people wept and cried out. Then suddenly, there was a growing hush. The wind had changed. From far out in the sea, she heard the sound of thunder roar. The Egyptians had heard it too and were struggling to go back. Too late, they saw the sea rushing toward them. In moments, their cries were smothered in the swiftly moving water. Tirzah could hardly believe her eyes. In the light of the morning sun, now climbing into the sky, the sea returned to its bed, claiming all in its path. Drowned, Tirzah whispered. Iron chariots, horses, soldiers, all were gone. The army of Egypt had vanished. Everywhere people were singing. Out of the hushed crowd, Moses' voice rose in a mighty shout of victory. As if on signal, the people echoed him with shout after shout. Tirzah scrambling down the face of her rocket into the crowd. Everywhere, people were singing and dancing and laughing all at once. Almost instantly, she was caught up in the nearest group of dancers. A score of tambourines appeared to join the flutes already playing. Never had there been such a celebration. When the sun was at its height, people rested on cloaks and cloths spread on the ground. Those who had food shared it with those who had none. As they ate and rested, a few hardy ones continued to play the pipes. Tirzah stretched herself full length beside Abihail and listened. Overhead, a seabird whirled, then glided on its silver-white wings. When we get to Canaan, Abihail was saying, I will ask Mother to make me a tambourine from the scraps of the next goat skin, and you must ask yourself to make you one. Lazily, Tirzah wiggled her toes and pictured herself dancing, tambourine in hand. Secretly, she would much rather play a pipe like Abishur's. Listen, Tirzah said, half rising on her elbows. Someone was calling for silence. Moses was going to speak, and the wind spread throughout the camp like a ripple across a lake. Once more, Moses stood on a rock near the water and raised his arms. In a strong, deep voice, he taught them a song of praise to Yahweh for his deliverance. Line after line, the people sang like a great festival chorus. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea. It was a mighty song, and Tirzah thought her heart would burst for pride and joy. When it was finished, the people cheered. Surely the Lord has risen up in triumph. Look, Abihail pointed to the tall woman in the blue robe who stood below Moses on the rock formation, a tambourine held high above her head. It's Miriam, and she's calling for the women to join her. Oh, Tirzah, how I wish we had our tambourines now, Abihail cried out. It was true. Women were streaming toward Miriam, shaking their tambourines joyously. The girls watched Miriam join the women and began the song. Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and rider he has hurled in the sea. This time, the music was even livelier as the women danced, shaking their tambourines and singing. It was late in the night when Tirzah lay down by the dying fire. The camp was quiet now, the stars bright overhead. From the north, a soft light shone from the cloud. Tirzah sighed, a happy little sigh. What a glorious day she would remember for the rest of her life. Oren whistled contentedly, and she glanced over at him sleepily. He shifted his head to look at her. You know, Tiz, when we get to Canaan, I'm going to write this all down. Tirzah thought she heard him humming, but her eyes were closing. The next chapter, 7, is called Forgiven. After the singing and the dancing, Ram found himself walking away from the camp toward its outskirts. He didn't want to be with his Uncle Shobal, and he couldn't go back to his father's tent now. Faintly aware he was heading east, he walked past the last tent. Far enough from the campsite to be alone, he stopped. For a while he sat on the ground, then stretched himself full length and shut his eyes against the soft light of the cloud. The hard ground felt warm, and its firmness supported his tired body. How long he lay, if he slept or not, Ram didn't know, but suddenly he was wide awake. A man was standing over him, and instantly Ram knew it was his father. He sat up quickly, but he could say nothing. Kneeling beside him, Jeraheel laid his staff on the ground. Son, I searched high and low for you everywhere. Impulsively, he reached out to grab Ram's shoulder. The pressure of his strong fingers felt good to Ram, though he didn't speak. When I couldn't find you, I thought I didn't know what. How did you find me? Ram asked, looking away from his father's face. Jeraheel sat back on his heels, a half smile on his lips. You're my son, Ram. I knew you would want to be alone. So when I couldn't find you in the camp, I began thinking of myself in your sandals, and they led me here. Ram covered his face with his hands, unable to hold back the tears. I doubted Moses, even Yahweh. I thought you were wrong. Uncle Shobal seemed so certain, and it was also unreasonable to walk into a trap. Ram couldn't stop the words that came pouring out of him. I never thought until tonight, about the miracles back in Egypt. Why weren't they enough proof for me that Yahweh would never deliver us in his own way through Moses? Now I know. That Yahweh would really deliver us in his own way through Moses. Now I know. Ram looked at his father with anguished eyes. What's wrong with me, Father? What will I do now? Jeraheel put his arm around Ram and pulled him close. What is wrong with you, son, is your youth. You are not so long out of childhood, not so long in manhood. What will you do? What all of us must do at times. You will ask forgiveness of Moses and Aaron, and then we will go on together to the promised land. Maybe we will both be wiser, more thankful now. Jeraheel ruffled his son's thick black hair. You've learned something, eh? Trust in Yahweh is just that, no matter what things look like. Ram looked at his father with new wonder and respect. As they walked together, Ram's heart beat faster and his mind raced. Ahead of them was the tent of Moses. What would this prophet of Yahweh do to him? By the tent door, a figure sat softly playing on a flute. When Ram and his father drew closer, he looked up. "What can I do for you?" Moses asked in a voice both quiet and questioning. "Please sit down," he added, gesturing to a place near the fire. When they were seated, Jericho began. "Moses, this is my son Ram, who has something to say to you." Moses, laying his flute on the ground, smiled and said, "Well then, lad, speak." Nervously, Ram cleared his throat, trying to find the words he knew he must say. "Sir, I have wronged you. I doubted your words. I sided with the men who wanted to go by the direct route to Canaan. I thought you were mistaken about Yahweh's leading, and that he might even let the cloud lead us in the wrong way as punishment. I was wrong. I cannot doubt now that Yahweh is with you." Ram stopped, his cheeks burning hot. "Ram, I want to tell you something," Moses said gently. "When Yahweh first called me to return to Egypt, I doubted. Was I not still known in Egypt as a deserter? Who would believe me, an old man? I even argued with him and angered him. It's a long story. But in his kindness and patience with me, Yahweh sent my brother Aaron to help me. So you see, you're not the first one to fall into that trap." Moses gently touched Ram's chin, lifting the boy's face to look up. "From now on, know that Yahweh is with his people to bring them into a good land, the promised land. Be brave, lad. Keep up your courage. Be strong for your people and faithful to Yahweh." In Moses' eyes, Ram saw a strength that he could never forget. A sob choked his throat so he couldn't speak. "My son and I are grateful. May Yahweh bless you," Jericho said, rising to his feet. Ram stood also. Moses raised his arm in blessing. "May he bless you and keep you." The warmth of the words wrapped themselves around Ram like a wool coat against the night air. At his father's side, he walked toward their tent with steps lighter than they had been for weeks. Or was it his heart? "Father, if only we could help Abishur." He never doubted Moses. He tried to tell his father, but Uncle Shobal was angry with him and wouldn't listen. "Abishur is a faithful son, not like me." Ram bit his lip. Jericho gripped Ram's arm. "Don't look back, son. Forgiveness washes away the old, lets the new breathe and grow. You are my beloved son, and what you will be in the future by the grace of Yahweh will make me proud." His father patted his arm. "As for Abishur, Yahweh sees his heart. When he is of age to leave his father's tent and take a wife, then we shall see a new Abishur." Ram was thinking of the new Abishur when they entered the tent. Okay, the next chapter is called Merry, M-E-R-R-I-E. And I have no idea what that means, because that's not how we usually spell Mary as in Merry Christmas, or Mary as in Mary and Joseph. So we'll find out in the next chapter. Bye-bye.